etkilendiğini gördük. Bunlar önemli. Türkiye bu konuda son 10 yılda aslında iç tasarrufları geliştirme konusunda ve milli gelirin bir payı olarak dış satımda iyi bir performans sergilemedi. Şimdi ben gerçekten İngiltere'de ne kadar murabahanın geliştiğini ve toplam finans kesimi içinde ne kadar geliştiğini ve dünya murabaha piyasası içinde ne kadar bir paya ulaştığını gerçekten merak ediyorum. Yani Körfez ülkelerinden Londra'ya doğru murabahanın kaymasını ve temel olmasını sağlayabildi mi? Bu tabii işin İngiltere tarafından bakışı. Tabii bir ikincisi de yine İngiltere tarafından bakışı. İngiltere'nin finans sistemi içinde ne kadar bir paya sahip oldu. Bir de bazı İngiliz bankacılardan duymuştum o televizyon programında. Faizsiz bankacılık küresel dalgalanmalara karşı bizi koruyor demişlerdi. Yani dünyada faizler çok yükselip indiği zaman murabahanın olması faizsiz bankacılık olduğu için, ribayı ortadan kaldırdığı için bizi bir anlamda bundan daha bağışık bir hale getirmesini sağlıyor demişti. Bunları gerçekten merak ediyoruz. Türkiye için Türkiye'de bu yasak değil. Murabaha Türkiye'de yapılabilen bir sistem. Bazı özel finans kuruluşlarımız faizsiz bankacılık yapıyor. Ama toplam bankacılık sistemimiz içinde de giderek daha büyük bir paya sahip olmuyor. Gelişmiyor değil ama giderek daha büyük bir paya sahip oluyor değil. Evet, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellencies, guests, Gunadin, good morning, and Assalamu alaikum. I'm afraid that's the extent of my Turkish. I wanted to say it feels a bit like my first post in government. And obviously it's a pleasure to be with a fellow Social Democrat, but my first ministerial role in government was as International Development Minister. And in the UK, every department once a month is accountable to Parliament, so you're questioned in Parliament. And this reminded me of my International Development Minister slot. Why? Because what followed that slot was the Prime Minister's question time. So the whole chamber would be full, but nobody would be interested in what you're saying. They're waiting for the next person. And it felt a bit like that when the Deputy Prime Minister had spoken, because everybody went out with him. But I'm pleased that one or two of you came back. It's very much appreciated, I think, by both of us. It's great to be in Istanbul. I suppose, especially if you're from Madrid. I know sometimes these jokes don't travel too well, but I'm referring to the football match yesterday, where I had the pleasure of going on the match, but unfortunately we didn't quite get the result I think we wanted to. I see a few smiles on faces, so they must be Fenerbahce supporters in here who are smiling at the moment. I want to say that, firstly, a big tribute to Professor Murat and to Umar Farooq Unal, who really were the brainchild children of this event some 3 or 4 years ago. I'm assuming it was relatively modest, relatively well supported, but it's become, I think, a very important bit of the agenda for Istanbul, and certainly where finance is concerned, putting Turkey on the map. I want to also really just speak about how we perceive Turkey. and just say that obviously in the last decade or so, Turkey has grown, its economy has grown, its stature has grown, and certainly our view is that Europe would be enriched by Turkey's accession into the EU. It would be enriched both economically, but also embedding the entrepreneurial spirit of the Turkish people, but also giving an ageing Europe some much needed entrepreneurship and youth. But the symbol there is the bridge. And I think that's a very powerful symbol, because in many ways Turkey is the bridge and the interface between, some would say, Islam and Christianity, East and West, Asia and Europe. And so there's no better place, I think, than to be here to speak about some of the issues. And as the Professor has alluded, it's going to be a bit about Islamic finance, probably a bit more about international development, the Millennium Development Goals, and a little bit about international politics. And I think if that last bit wasn't there, you'd get bored. So that's just to spice it up a little bit. And I've got to say that the Professor talked about shifting Sharia compliant financial services to the UK. But as I speak further on, you'll see that actually it's not they that have shifted it to us. It's we who've seen a benefit in it, and I'll go into that a bit later. You know, it was Lenin who said that there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And I think we're privileged that we've lived and live in an era when we can honestly say that there are weeks when decades have happened. And if we look back, perhaps not that long ago, who would have thought that Reagan and Gorbachev would shake hands, perestroika ensue, and the Berlin Wall come tumbling down? Who would have thought that Mandela and de Klerk would shake hands and apartheid come tumbling down? Who would have thought at the time that Rabin and Arafat would shake hands and bring hope to the Middle East? In my own country, who would have thought that Adams, Trimble and Hume would sign the Good Friday Agreement and bring lasting peace to Northern Ireland? Who would have thought that an African American with a Muslim father could become president of the USA? And of course, who would have thought that we would witness the Arab Spring in the way that we have? And of course, the only real comparison with the Arab Spring is, since the Second World War, is probably the collapse of the Soviet Union. But we also know that change isn't always a positive thing. Who would have thought after some 50 years and the loss of 6 million Jewish lives, Europe would once more witness the horrors of extremism and nationalism as we saw in Bosnia, in Kosovo and elsewhere? Who would have thought that we'd witness 9/11, 7/7, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, parts of the Arab Spring? Who would think that today we'd see Muslims killing Muslims in the name of Islam? Completely perverse. But let me move to some of the development challenges. We're speaking about finance, but finance doesn't exist in a vacuum. With finance, it's obligatory to look at poverty and development. It's obligatory to look at politics and democracy. But it's said that we live in an enlightened millennium. Yet in this enlightened millennium, we have over 1 billion people living on just about $1.25 a day or less. 650 million of them are women. Every minute, a woman dies needlessly from giving birth or pregnancy-related causes. Every 5 seconds, a child dies from poverty. That's 22,000 children just today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every year there are some 5 million people who die from HIV, TB and malaria. And there are 70 million children who don't have a primary school to go to. And in many ways that's precisely where you guys come in, because it's your leadership that is going to make a difference to the lives of millions of people, obviously in this country, but also around the world. We live in an increasingly interdependent and interconnected world, where something that happens thousands of miles away can have an impact on our towns, on our cities, and on our countries. Issues such as climate change, resource scarcity, disease, and even terrorism don't respect national or international boundaries. And so if we can make one part of the world a happier, better place, then it benefits all the world. And I think in the context of the UK, we're very clear that as one of the richer countries in the world, we've got a responsibility beyond our shores. And I'm very proud of the fact that despite the fact that we don't have a social democrat government at the moment, another year and a half and we'll be back, but we've still got a government that is sticking to our target of achieving 0.7% of our official development assistance, 0.7% of our gross national income to be spent on overseas aid. And I think that's a big, big positive. So while other countries are contracting, we actually are increasing year on year the aid that we've given and that we give. And I've seen the impact that this aid can make on the lives of people. I remember going to Bangladesh and I met a young girl who I worked out she earned 1 pence an hour. 1 pence an hour. And she worked every day, 5 or 6 hours, but because of an educational program that we had funded, she was getting time off work to engage in educational activity. And I was fascinated by her vision for her children and her aspirations for her children when she was 11 years old, but her aspirations for her children in the future. And she was talking about doctors and all the kind of things that you might expect and hope for your children. And she had those same aspirations despite the abject poverty in which she lived. And that's the power of education. Later on, I went to a slum called Mirpur in Dhaka, where they were, I suppose, celebrating the fact that we'd now got 3 flush toilets that we'd invested in there for that slum. And I know that in many countries, my own country, perhaps Turkey, in one house you can have 3 toilets, but these 3 toilets were to be shared by 139 people. And you can imagine the challenges that exist for people in different parts of the world, which should, I think, make us always remember just how lucky we are and where we are. And given that we've got the Pakistan Prime Minister here today, not here as in the hall, but here in Istanbul, I recollect I approved a £90 million project on newborn and maternal health that will have saved the lives of some 350,000 children and some 30,000 women. It just goes to show the impact you can have if you are effectively investing your aid. And what I'm going to do is semi-briefly speak about Sharia-compliant financial services, then get slightly back onto this subject when we're on the home straight. But it's my view that there is a great global opportunity for Turkey because of the reasons I gave, because of this bridge, because of this interface, because you're modern, you're democratic, and of course you're Islamic in many ways, and I know that's semi-contentious sometimes in Turkey. I've tried to nuance it as best as I could, but I think there's a great opportunity for Turkey in the context of Sharia-compliant financial services. I want to speak about the UK, about why we've been going down that route and the positives that we see from it. The UK actually is the leading country where Islamic finance is concerned, with some 19 billion of reported assets. London's profile as the leading Western centre of Islamic finance has grown in recent years, although institutions in the UK have been providing Islamic financial services for some 30 years. We have 20 banks, 6 are fully Sharia compliant, and that is number 1 in the West. We have over 34 billion raised through 49 issues in the London Stock Exchange. 7 exchange trade funds, 2 exchange trade products are also quoted on the London Stock Exchange. Around 25 law firms supplying services in Islamic finance. The use of Islamic finance for major infrastructure projects such as the Shahid, which is the tallest building in Europe, and Chelsea Barracks, some 2.4 billion of Ijra financing. And of course we've got Islamic finance qualifications offered by 4 professional institutions and at least 10 universities and business schools. And there again, that's a great opportunity, I think, for Turkey with the growth of education here. And I mean, it didn't just happen. The UK government, it wasn't foisted upon us. I want to make this clear. We saw this as an opportunity. And Gordon Brown in particular was very keen on ensuring that we exploited this opportunity to the best of our abilities. An important feature of the development of London and the UK has been supportive government policies intended to broaden the market for Islamic products. The Labour government made major reforms to the tax and regulatory system to promote growth and consumer choice. But why Islamic finance? Why the UK? Why London? To truly understand the UK's desire to be a global player in the Islamic banking world, one must understand the psyche of the country, its government, its politics, the construction of its economy, and of course the pivotal role of the UK and London in particular in the global economy. Although London is the main financial hub for the UK, there are at least 10 other major cities that are important international financial centres. But London isn't just the hub in the UK. According to the Global Financial Centres Index, London is the #1 financial centre in the world, followed by New York, Hong Kong and Singapore, in that order. Although London and New York have been there for some time, there's a real gallop coming from the east as the economic pendulum shifts from the west. So being #1 feels good, but what does it actually mean for the UK economy? Well, if I were to tell you that in terms of net exporters of financial services, the Singapore surplus is 10 billion, the Hong Kong surplus is 11 billion, the USA surplus is 16 billion, how much do you think the UK surplus might be? It's semi-rhetorical, but if anybody wants to answer, you're very welcome. Okay, no takers. There's a staggering $51 billion surplus, or 50% greater than the sum of the surpluses in the USA, Hong Kong and Singapore. But according to the IMF, the UK globally is also #1 in foreign exchange turnover, the bullion market, derivatives, and the list goes on. Hence, the UK is the leading exporter of financial services across the world, as demonstrated. Financial services make a huge contribution to our GDP and to the UK's balance of trade. As for the government's objectives, which is the crux of, I think, the question that the Professor was posing, well, I think to a much lesser extent, pretty obviously, it gives people choice. It gives Muslims who are that way inclined an opportunity to get services which are in line with their beliefs and thinking. But from a macro perspective, it enables the city to remain at the forefront of developments in global financial markets, and it's in line with our long-term ambition for Britain to become the gateway to Islamic finance and trade, strengthening Britain's own trading links with Muslim countries. The foundation for making Britain the gateway to Islamic trade is to make Britain the global centre for Islamic finance. I think the UK has unique factors which contribute to success. We have a history, language, geography, flexibility and openness. That's very kind. It says 30 more minutes. That's very sweet. Thank you. Today, British banks are pioneering Islamic banking. And I suppose that gives you a little understanding of why we've gone down that particular route. I said earlier that you can't look at these things in a vacuum. Nothing exists in a vacuum. It all has to be in context. I think the Deputy Prime Minister was very good at looking at things in a holistic way when he spoke not just about finance, but also about poverty and about politics and about the need for people to feel that there was justice. And actually, the reality is that prosperity for many is not sustainable, while poverty for many others is a reality, and that peace and prosperity go hand in hand. And I just want to give you some facts that bear that out. The estimated cost of one conflict equals the world's annual development aid. Conflicts cost Africa about $18 billion a year. For every year of civil war, a country's growth rate falls by an estimated 2.2%. And £1 spent on preventing violent conflicts saves the international community £4. Of course, we've seen in the MENA region in particular a lot of things going on. Some of them we thought were positive, some haven't been so positive, some are utterly depressing. In Libya, we tolerated 50 deaths in Benghazi before we introduced the no-fly zone, and the UN and NATO stepped in to stop the bloodshed. Since Libya, we've seen killings on a quite terrifying scale in Syria. Over 100,000 dead, 2 million registered refugees, 4.2 million displaced, and the list goes on. Yet, no UN, no NATO, no no-fly zone. I merely pose the question, what message does that give to the rest of the world? And if you feel abandoned by much of the world, and especially the world order, then do you really care who your freedom fighter is? Of course, Al-Qaeda is a serious threat for the medium to long term, as it appears is Hezbollah. But the people of Syria don't have the luxury of choosing their defenders. Sadly, our inertia, our inability to do the right thing by the people of Syria has been a key ingredient on where we are today. And obviously, I've also got to say this, that, and we're on the home straight for the record, I've also got to say this, that, you know, we've heard a lot about freedom and democracy being the way forward. We heard it a lot from President Bush when he was in power. It felt like almost on a daily basis. I don't disagree. I'm a Democrat and I believe in freedom. We've heard it from President Obama as well. But you know, if you say that it's okay to have democracy for Iraq, but then when it comes to Palestine or indeed Egypt, democracy is not quite a good thing, then that's no longer seen as democracy, it's seen as hypocrisy. And our challenge in the West is to ensure that our values and not our perceived vested interests are the things that guide us. Because ultimately in the long term, that is what will sustain us. That is our true vested interest, is sticking and being true and sincere with our values. It was Martin Luther King who said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And for many people, poverty, disease, injustice and a perversion of true religion are evils in our society and are injustices in themselves. And it was Edmund Burke, a British parliamentarian and philosopher, who said that for evil to prevail, all that's required is that good people do nothing. And I know for sure that you're not the kind of good people that are about doing nothing. Thank you.
Evet, Mr. Malik'e etkileyici konuşması için kutluyoruz. Konuşmasında önemli siyasi düşünürlerden de sözler ekledi, yoksulluktan bahsetti ve tabii ki temel konusu olan İslami finansmanın İngiltere'deki gelişmesiyle ilgili bilgiler verdi. Ben tabii soruları almak istiyorum ama iki konuyu özellikle vurgulamak istiyorum. Bir tanesi İslami finansmanın İngiltere'deki kalkınmayı finanse etmek amacıyla değil, sıralamayı da Mr. Malik verdi, Shahid Malik verdi. Tabii Londra başta geliyor, New York, Singapur vesaire diğerleri daha arkada, Hong Kong geliyor ama temel mesele Körfez sermayesinin başka bir yere akmasını engellemek ve Londra'da bu sermayeyi, bu büyük sermayeyi toplayabilmek için. Temel mesele o. Yani İngiltere'deki bir finansal kalkınma modeli olarak değil. Çünkü geleneksel finansman modeli İngiltere'de devam ediyor. Fakat alternatif finansmanın, İslami birikimlerin bir başka alana gitmesini engellemek için tabii ki akıllıca bir strateji. Türkiye için bir model olabilir mi? Şu aşamada Türkiye'de İslami finansman biraz önce söylediğim gibi var. Tali olarak yürüyor. Temel bir model olarak yürümüyor. Avantajları var. Türkiye'deki İslami finansman modeli veya murabaha İngiltere'dekinden farklı olarak tabii yurt içinde değerlendiriliyor ve önemli katkılar da sağlayabiliyor. Burada temel mesele şu, Türkiye'de sanayileşme ve şirketlerin gelişmesi sağlandıkça dışarıdaki, Türkiye'nin içinde değil, murabaha arayanlar değil, Körfez'de murabaha arayanların Türkiye'ye cazip hale gelmesi mümkün olabilir. Temel mesele de odur. Yani Türkiye'de murabahayı geliştirelim diye uğraşmak yerine Körfez'de murabaha arayan olağanüstü büyük rakamları çekmek istiyorsak ve Türkiye'nin sanayileşmesine, şirketlerin gelişmesine yardımcı olmak istiyorsak bu şirketlerin ve bu sanayilerin de gelişmesini ve onlar için cazip hale gelmesini sağlamak gerekir. 1974'te petrol krizinden sonra olağanüstü yüksek petrol gelirlerini 79'da beraber Arap parasının Londra'ya gidip oradaki ve Amerika'ya gidip büyük sanayi şirketlerinden hisse aldığını biliyoruz. İşte murabaha da aslında onun bir gelişmesinin devamı, bir kısmının da bu yolla gelmesini sağlamaya çalışıyorlar. Tabii onun için Sayın Malik'e teşekkür ediyoruz. Siz de bu yoldan biraz faydalanın. Bir tek biz yararlanıyoruz İngiltere olarak. Siz de Körfez sermayesinin sağa sola kaçmasını engelleyip kendi ülkenize de gelmesini sağlayabilirsiniz diyor. Bu bakımdan önemli bir noktaya işaret etmiş oluyor. Evet, ben çok konuşmayayım, ben konuşucu değilim. Ben ara bulucuyum. Evet, soru sormak isteyen kim var? Bana değil tabii, Sayın Malik'e. Bize mecliste soruyorlar zaten veya toplumda. Soru yok mu? Yani riba fadl nedir, riba nas nedir filan merakınız olabilir. Bilmiyorum, bu kadar ayrıntıları bilmiyor ama biliyor mu ama. Evet, buyurun.
Orta Karadeniz Kalkınma Ajansı Genel Sekreteri Mevlüt Özen ben. Samsun'dan geliyorum. Teşekkür ediyorum öncelikle etkileyici konuşması ve sunumu için. Sunumun bir yerinde ya da konuşmanın bir yerinde geçen her gün 25.000 çocuk ölüyor cümlesi benim çok irkilmeme sebep oldu. Tabii ki bildiğimiz bir gerçek ama bir kere daha böyle bir finans zirvesinde duymak çok etkileyici. Dünya şu geldiğimiz noktada yeterince bu 25.000 çocuğun ölmemesi için gerekli tedbirler alıyor mu? İnsanlık vicdanı gerekli tedbirleri alma konusunda şu anda yeterince etkin mi? Fikrini sormak istiyorum. Teşekkür ederim.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. I'd like to say yes. I'd love to say yes. Nothing would give me greater pleasure than to say yes. But I think the reality is that I think it was Gandhi who said that this world has enough for every man's, he meant women as well, every man's need but not every man's greed. And I think sadly we live in a world, although I've got to say the business community year on year is becoming much more progressive, looking at things like CSR, etc. But it seems to me that that the idea that you could save lives is important, but it's not as important as many other things. And people are willing in some countries to take lives without thinking twice. The price of life is very cheap, and I don't accept this as an equation, but when I spoke, I talked about 50 people dying in Libya and 100,000 dying in Syria. And if you look at a very simplistic equation, why are 50 Libyan lives and 100,000 lives, well, 50 Libyan lives actually are more powerful. They're worth more than 100,000 Libyan lives. And then you see what you do is you then give an opportunity to people who perhaps believe in conspiracy theories or are looking for excuses to say, okay, what's the difference? This is quite startling, profound difference. Okay, one has oil and the other one has only blood and tears. Is that the difference? I'm not saying it is, but I think we've got to be much more responsible. And I pointed to the West because I think we have the biggest responsibility. Why? Because we're the ones that are constantly lecturing the world. Every day, on a daily basis, we're doing it. But if we don't live in the way that we lecture, then that undermines everything that we stand for, that we say we stand for. And that's our challenge. I am proud of the UK, where international development is concerned. I think every country in the world, the UN has got a target. Every country in the world should be giving 0.7% of its gross national income to development, to aid. And I'm very proud of the fact that we're almost there. But, there are many countries that are going in the other direction, many countries nowhere near at all. But as the professor said on Islamic finance, in many ways, we're doing it not necessarily because we believe in Islamic finance. We're doing it because we see a commercial opportunity, because we believe London should be the centre of the universe, and especially where finance is concerned. I find it hard saying that because I'm actually from Lancashire, which is 250 miles north of London. But anyway, we'll continue. So I think in the same way, this 0.7%, of course we're doing it to help, but also doing it for ourselves. Because if we can help other countries then there's less problems for us, and we all benefit. So I think that the best test would be for countries who has achieved or will achieve that 0.7%. You can almost say yes, they do care about humanity, and those that are nowhere near, well, they don't. And the only other point I would make on that, and I'm answering 3 in 1 because there's no other questions, that's for the moderator, and the only other point I would say, we talked about growth earlier, the Deputy Prime Minister did, and he talked about quality of growth. This 0.7%, it's obviously you're speaking about quantum but not about quality. Quality is important. What I would say is your aid has got to be progressive. Our aid is based on need. It's not tied aid. It's not a subsidy to our own contractors. 90 odd cents out of every dollar we spend in Afghanistan goes to Afghanistan. That is not true of many countries, and I think it's well known that the US is not particularly progressive where aid is concerned. But we don't care about politics, we care about poverty. And if you've got 0.7% on poverty, then I say your country does care.
Thank you very much. I think we've over-completed the time, and the moderator of the moderator has warned me a few times, and the floor is yours now.
Değerli konuklarımıza konuşmaları için teşekkür ediyoruz ve Sayın Devlet Bakanımız Cevdet Yılmaz'ı, Kalkınma Bakanımız Cevdet Yılmaz'ı sahneye davet edeceğim. Konuklarımıza plaketlerini vermek üzere. Değerli konuklarımız, programımız yemek için ara vereceğiz. Ancak sonrasında saat 13'te Sayın Kalkınma Bakanımız Cevdet Yılmaz'ın bir konuşması olacak. Salondaki yerlerinizi 13 itibariyle almanızı rica edeceğim.